This happened in 2018 when 4 of my friends and I drove from Surabaya to hike Mount Semeru in East Java. We had planned the trip for months. None of us were experienced hikers, but we were excited. We packed our backpacks, rented a small Toyota Avanza, and left Surabaya late in the afternoon after everyone finished work. At first, the drive was fun. We listened to music, joked around, and stopped at roadside warangs for coffee and instant noodles. But as we got closer to the mountains, the weather changed. The air became colder, a thick fog settled over the road, and by the time we reached the forest near Ranupani, it was raining so hard that visibility was almost zero. It was nearly 11 at night. The road was narrow and winding. Pine trees surrounded us on both sides. We were exhausted. One of my friends suggested we sleep in the car, but then we saw a small wooden sign that said Penginapan. A short dirt road led to a simple house with one light still on. An elderly couple answered the door. The husband looked surprised to see us, but after a brief conversation, he agreed to rent us a small room with thin mattresses laid side by side on the floor. It wasn't fancy, but we were grateful. Before he left, the old man paused at the doorway. Then he said something I didn't understand at the time. "If you hear knocking tonight, do not open the door." We laughed because we thought he was joking. He didn't laugh back. Then he quietly closed the door behind him. None of us slept right away. The rain pounded on the roof, wind rattled the wooden walls, and every now and then we could hear branches scraping against the windows. Around 2 in the morning, I finally drifted off. Then I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside our room. At first, I thought one of my friends had gone to the bathroom, but when I looked around, everyone was still asleep. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, as if someone were walking back and forth on the gravel just outside our window. I checked my phone, 2:17 a.m. I lay there listening. The footsteps circled the house once, then twice. Then they stopped directly outside our room. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then came 3 soft knocks. Not on the front door, on the wooden wall beside my head. I sat up immediately. One of my friends, Bimo, was awake too. He whispered, "Do you hear that?" Before I could answer, the knocks came again. 3 times, slow and evenly spaced. Bimo started to get up, thinking maybe the owner needed something. I grabbed his arm, and that was when I remembered the old man's warning. "If you hear knocking tonight, do not open the door." We stayed completely still. A few moments later, another friend woke up and asked what was happening. None of us wanted to answer. Then we heard footsteps again. This time, they moved toward the front of the house. We thought it was over, but a few minutes later, Rian, who was sleeping closest to the window, sat straight up. His face had gone pale. He pointed at the curtain and whispered, "Someone is standing outside." I felt my stomach drop. Very slowly, I turned toward the window. Through a small gap in the curtain, I saw a figure in white standing in the rain. A woman. Her long black hair hung over her face. She wasn't moving. She was just standing there, looking into the room. None of us said a word. We were too afraid to move. Then, without warning, the figure tilted her head slightly to one side and smiled. At that exact moment, the lights in our room flickered. When they came back on, the woman was gone. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. We sat together in silence, waiting for sunrise. As soon as the first light appeared, we opened the door. The ground outside was soaked from the rain, but there were no footprints, not a single one. We packed our things and went to the kitchen, where the elderly couple were preparing tea. The old man looked at our faces and immediately knew something had happened. When we described the woman and the knocking, he became very quiet. After a long pause, he told us that hikers had reported similar experiences for years. According to local belief, the forest around Semeru is inhabited by spirits. Most of them are harmless, but some are drawn to travelers who are tired, lost, or far from home. The knocking, he said, was a test. If we had opened the door, we might have invited something inside. We asked him who the woman was. He simply shook his head and said, "Some guests are not meant to be welcomed." We continued our hike later that morning. The trip went on as planned, and eventually we laughed about what had happened. At least, we tried to. A week after returning to Surabaya, I was reviewing the photos from the trip. Most were completely normal. Then I found one taken just before sunrise outside the guest house. All 5 of us were standing in front of the car, smiling. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I looked at the window behind us. Standing inside the room, partially hidden by the curtain, was the same woman in white, watching us leave. My name is Fajar. This happened in 2021, when 3 close friends and I decided to drive from Jakarta to Bali. The plan was simple: drive across Java, stop whenever we found interesting places, and camp whenever we could. It felt like something we had talked about for years but never actually did. There were 4 of us in total: me, Arif, Denny, and Raka. We had been friends since college, and we traveled well together. Arif was the quiet one in the group. He was practical, level-headed, and not the type to believe in ghosts or supernatural stories. That is part of why what happened still bothers me. The first 2 days of the trip were incredible. We stopped in Cirebon for seafood, watched the sunrise near Semarang, and spent hours driving through mountain roads and rice fields. By the 3rd evening, we were deep in East Java, only a few hours from Ketapang, where we planned to catch the ferry to Bali the next morning. It was already close to 11 at night and we were exhausted. The road had been long and dark, and none of us felt like wasting another hour looking for a hotel. So when we noticed a wide open field near a small village, it seemed like the perfect place to spend the night. The area looked peaceful. There was a dirt road, a few large banyan trees, and some distant lights from the village. We saw no signs, no fences, and nothing to suggest we were trespassing. We parked the car, set up 2 tents, and cooked instant noodles on a portable stove. At first, the mood was light. We joked about how much money we were saving and talked about what we wanted to do once we reached Bali. But after a while, Arif became unusually quiet. He kept looking toward the trees at the edge of the field. Finally, he said, "Does this place feel strange to anyone else?" We asked what he meant. He shook his head and said, "I don't know. It just feels like we're not supposed to be here." We laughed and told him he had been watching too many horror movies. But as the night went on, I started to understand what he meant. The silence was unnatural. There were no crickets, no frogs, no dogs barking from the village, no sound at all. It was as if the entire area was waiting. Around midnight, we decided to get some sleep. Arif and I shared one tent. Denny and Raka slept in the other. I remember lying there, listening to the wind moving through the trees, thinking that the place felt heavier than it should. At some point, I fell asleep. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up to a short electronic chirp. It was the sound our car alarm makes when one of the doors is opened and closed. I opened my eyes and listened. Nothing. I checked my phone, and it was 2:46 a.m. I was about to lie back down when I heard footsteps outside the tent. Slow and measured footsteps, moving across the grass. At first, I assumed one of the guys got up to pee. Then I reached beside me. Arif's sleeping bag was empty. For a second, I thought he might have gone to the car, but something felt wrong immediately. Arif was not the type to wander off in the middle of the night without saying anything. I called his name softly. No answer. Then louder. Still nothing. My chest tightened. I grabbed my flashlight and fully unzipped the tent. The night air felt much colder than before. I ran to the other tent and woke Denny and Reka. They could tell from my face that something was seriously wrong. Within seconds, the 3 of us were searching the field. At first, we saw nothing. The grass moved in the wind. The car sat exactly where we had parked it. Everything looked normal. Then Reka suddenly pointed toward the tree line. About 50 meters away, we saw a figure walking slowly toward the forest. It was Arif. He was barefoot. His arms hung loosely at his sides, and he was walking in a perfectly straight line, not stumbling, not looking around, just moving forward as if he were following someone. We shouted his name, again and again. He never turned around. He didn't hesitate. He didn't react at all. We started running toward him. The closer we got, the more terrified I became. There was something unnatural about the way he moved. His pace was steady and mechanical, as if he were sleepwalking, but he never sleepwalked before. His eyes were open. When we were only a few meters behind him, my flashlight beam illuminated the ground ahead, and my stomach dropped. The field ended abruptly. In front of a reef was a steep ravine hidden by tall grass and darkness. One more step and he would have fallen. Maybe not far enough to die, but certainly far enough to be badly injured. We lunged forward and grabbed him. He fought us for a moment, not violently, but like someone trying to continue walking. We shook him and called his name over and over. Finally, he blinked. His body went limp. He looked around at us in complete confusion. The first thing he said was, "Why were you calling me from the trees?" We stared at him, confused. I said, "What are you talking about? We've been behind you this whole time." The color drained from his face. He told us he woke up because he heard my voice outside the tent. Then he heard Denny and Reika too. He said he could see 3 figures standing near the trees. He thought it was us. He said we were smiling and waving for him to come closer. He was certain we were waiting for him. The 4 of us returned to the tents, but none of us slept again. At sunrise, 2 older men from the nearby village rode over on motorcycles. They looked surprised to see our tents. One of them asked if we had spent the night there. When we said yes, he became very serious. We explained what had happened. He listened quietly. Then he told us the field was considered sacred. According to local belief, voices are sometimes heard there after midnight. The voices imitate friends and relatives. Their purpose is to lure people away from camp and toward the ravine and the forest beyond. The old man looked directly at a reef and said, "You were very lucky your friends woke up when they did." We packed our tents without saying much. We boarded the ferry to Bali, but the mood never recovered. Even while sitting on beautiful beaches and eating fresh seafood, a reef seemed distant. Weeks later, he finally admitted something he had been too afraid to say. He said that while he was walking that night, the 3 figures ahead of him did not look exactly like us. Their faces were smiling, but their eyes were completely black. To this day, whenever our group talks about that trip, there is one thing we all agree on. If I had ignored that car alarm and gone back to sleep, a reef would have kept walking. My name is Reza. This happened when I was 24 years old. At the time, I was working as a freelance photographer in Yogyakarta. Most of my jobs involved traveling to small towns and villages to photograph weddings and local businesses. Growing up in Indonesia, you hear a lot of stories. Stories about places you should never visit after dark, roads you should not take alone, villages where people say the boundary between our world and something else is thinner. I never believed any of that, at least not until this happened. One afternoon, I had just finished photographing a traditional wedding in a rural area outside Magelang in central Java. The reception ran later than expected, and by the time I packed my equipment and started driving back to Yogyakarta, it was already close to 9 at night. It was raining lightly. The roads were wet and almost completely empty. I was exhausted, hungry, and just wanted to get home. About an hour into the drive, my GPS suggested a shortcut that would save nearly 40 minutes. I hesitated. The road looked much smaller than the main highway, but I was tired, so I took it. At first, everything seemed normal. Rice fields stretched out on both sides of the road. Banana trees swayed in the wind. Every few minutes, I passed small houses with dim yellow lights glowing inside. Then, after about 20 minutes, the road became narrower. The asphalt turned into rough concrete. The houses disappeared. Even the GPS signal started cutting in and out. That was when I saw a tiny roadside warung with a single fluorescent light hanging above it. I pulled over to buy a bottle of water and asked for directions. The only person there was an elderly woman wearing a faded batik sarong and a dark shawl over her shoulders. She looked at me for a long time before speaking. I told her I was trying to get back to Yogyakarta and asked if I was still on the right road. Instead of answering, she asked if I was traveling alone. When I said yes, her expression changed. She leaned closer and said quietly, "If you reach a village ahead, do not stop. She did not smile. She repeated herself. Whatever you see, keep driving and do not look back. Something about the way she said it made me uneasy. I thanked her, got back in my car, and drove away. For the next 15 minutes, the road grew darker and narrower. The rain stopped completely. The silence became so intense that all I could hear was my tires rolling over the wet pavement. Then, without warning, the road opened into a village. At first, it looked ordinary. A row of wooden houses stood on both sides of the road. Warm lights glowed through the windows. I could hear soft gamelan music drifting through the night, along with the distant sound of people talking. As I drove slowly through the village, I noticed people standing inside the houses. They were not moving. They were simply watching me. Men, women, children, all standing silently behind curtains and open doorways. Every face turned toward my car. I told myself they were just curious about a stranger passing through so late at night. Then my headlights swept across a small open pavilion near the center of the village. Several people were seated in a circle around offerings, flowers, bowls of water, burning incense. Their heads were bowed. One of them slowly lifted his face and looked directly at me. Even from inside the car, I felt my chest tighten. I pressed harder on the gas. The road continued straight for what felt like forever. Then I glanced in the rearview mirror. The people who had been inside their houses were now standing outside. All of them. Still silent, still watching. And one figure had stepped into the middle of the road behind me. A woman in white. Her hair covered her face. She stood perfectly still. Then she began walking toward my car. Not quickly, just slowly, steadily. My heart was pounding so hard that my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I remembered what the old woman had said. Do not stop. Do not look back. So I kept driving. I did not check the mirror again. I focused on the road ahead and gripped the steering wheel as hard as I could. After several minutes, I saw the first street light, then another. The road widened, and suddenly I was back on the main highway. The GPS signal returned as if nothing had happened. I pulled over at a gas station and sat there for nearly 20 minutes, trying to calm down. I barely slept that night. The next day, I told a friend from Magalang what had happened. The moment I described the village, he asked exactly where I had turned off the highway. After a long silence, he said there used to be a village in that area. Decades ago, many of the residents died during a disease outbreak. Some people believed the survivors performed rituals to protect the land. Others said the village was abandoned and slowly reclaimed by the forest. But local drivers still avoided that road after sunset. I asked him if the village was still there. He shook his head. According to him, there is nothing there now. No houses, no lights, no people. Just an empty stretch of road between the rice fields. I never took that shortcut again.